Daniel looked me dead in the eye, didn't even flinch, and said, "Since we'll be sharing custody, we'll still have plenty of time for ourselves." He was talking about the baby he was having with another woman. He was asking me, his wife, to help him raise as a fair child, like he was suggesting we split a streaming subscription. I remember the exact way the kitchen light hit the side of his face when he said it. I remember the chip in the rim of the mug I was holding, the one with the faded sunflower on it that we'd bought at a car boot sale 3 summers ago. I remember thinking, almost calmly, this is the moment my whole life cracks down the middle. And the strangest part, the part one still can't fully explain, is that he wasn't ashamed. He was hopeful. He looked at me with this earnest, expectant face, like a man pitching a holiday plan, like he genuinely believed I'd say yes. But to understand how I ended up standing in that kitchen, gripping a chipped mug while my husband calmly mapped out a future where I'd be a part-time mother to his mistress's child, you have to go back. You have to understand who I was before all of this, who we were, or who I thought we were. I'm going to call him Daniel, because that wasn't his name, and after everything, he doesn't get the dignity of his real one anywhere near my story. We met when I was 26. I was working a small bookshop cafe, the kind that smelled like cinnamon and old paper, and he came in every Thursday for the same flat white and a slice of lemon drizzle. For weeks he just smiled. Then one Thursday he left a note tucked under his saucer that said, "I keep coming back for the cake, but I think it's actually you." It was cheesy. It was perfect. I was 26 and lonely, and he made me laugh until my ribs hurt. We dated for 2 years and married in a registry office because neither of us had the money for anything bigger, and honestly, I didn't care. I had him. We rented a little flat on the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian house, with the radiator that clanked and the window that stuck and the neighbors who played accordion music on Sunday mornings. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Both our names were on the lease, side by side, and at the time that felt romantic. Permanent, like a promise written down where everyone could see it. For the first few years, we were good. I'm not going to lie and paint our marriage as some flawless fairy tale, because nothing real ever is. We argued about money. We argued about whose turn it was to call the landlord about the damp in the bathroom. But underneath all of that, I trusted him completely. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I never once, not for a single second, imagined he could do this to me. Trust wasn't even a question I asked myself. It was just a floor I stood on. You don't check whether the floor is going to hold. You just walk on it. And then his mother got sick. Her name was Eleanor, and before the dementia took her, she was one of the warmest people I have ever known. She had this laugh that started in her belly, and she used to call me love in this soft way that made me feel like I'd been folded into the family the moment Daniel brought me home. When she started forgetting things, small things at first, where she'd put her glasses, the name of the road she'd lived on for 40 years. Daniel was an only child in practice. His siblings lived hours away, scattered across the country with their own families and their own lives, and so it fell to us. To me, really, if I'm being honest, we moved her into our flat. It wasn't a big place, and squeezing her meant turning our tiny box room into her bedroom and living on top of each other in a way that should have driven us mad. For a year and a half, I cared for that woman. I bathed her when she could no longer manage it herself. I cut her food into small pieces and sat with her while she ate, slowly, telling her the same gentle stories over and over because they made her smile even when she couldn't remember my name. There were nights she woke at 3 a.m, convinced she was a girl again and needed to get to school, and I'd sit on the edge of her bed and hold her hands and talk her back down to sleep. I did the night shifts. I did the doctor's appointments. I did the laundry when she had accidents, and I never once let her see me cry about it because she didn't need to carry my exhaustion on top of everything else she was losing. I loved her. That's the truth of it. I loved that woman like she was my own mother, and I would do it all again. And the whole time, the entire time, Daniel was having an affair. I didn't know that then, of course. I thought he was working late because we needed the money, with his mother's care eating into everything. I thought the distance I sometimes felt from him was just exhaustion, just the weight of watching his mother disappear by inches. I made excuses for him that he didn't deserve. I covered for the cracks in our marriage with my own 2 hands because I assumed he was as tired and as heartbroken as I was. Eleanor died in November. She passed in the early hours of a gray, rainy morning with me holding her hand because Daniel had stepped out for some air and didn't make it back in time. I sat with her body for a long while after, just talking to her, thanking her. I planned most of the funeral. I chose the flowers she liked, freesias, because she always said they smelled like spring. I wrote part of the eulogy. I grieved her like a daughter grieves a mother. And less than 6 weeks later, in the cold, gray middle of December, Daniel sat me down and told me he'd been having an affair, that the woman was pregnant, and that he wanted me to help raise the child. He didn't even try to deny it. That's the part that still knocks the wind out of me when I think about it. There was no discovered text message, no lipstick on a collar, no dramatic moment where I caught him. He just told me, the way you'd announce a change in dinner plans. One of his colleagues. She was pregnant. And then, before I could even process the first blow, he hit me with the second. He didn't want a divorce. He loved me. He wanted us to stay together, and he'd worked it all out. They'd share custody of the baby, so it wouldn't even take up that much of our time. We'd still have evenings to ourselves. Weekends. He said it like he was being generous. I just stared at him. I remember my mouth was open, but no sound came out. The mug was warm in my hands, and I was aware of the heat of it the way you're aware of small, stupid things when the whole world is falling apart. I asked him, and my voice came out so much steadier than I felt, why don't you just raise the child with her? And he said she was married, that she couldn't leave her husband, that this was the only way it could work. He laid it all out so reasonably, so calmly, that for one horrifying second, I almost felt like I was the unreasonable one for not immediately agreeing. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the mug, though God knows part of me wanted to. I set it down on the counter very carefully because if I'd held a moment longer, I think my hands would have started shaking so hard I'd have dropped it. And I said, I need to think. And I walked into our bedroom, the bedroom I'd shared with this man, the bedroom right next to where his dying mother had slept while he was off betraying me. And I closed the door and I sat on the edge of the bed and I felt something inside me go very, very quiet. What would you have done in this situation? Because I've turned it over 1,000 times since, lying awake in my sister's guest room, wondering if there was a version of me that would have screamed, that would have thrown things, that would have demanded answers right there. But I didn't have it in me. All I had was that cold, clear silence, and underneath it, one single thought repeating, I am not staying. Whatever happens, I'm not staying. Let me know in the comments what you'd have done, because I genuinely still wonder. That night, I lay next to him because there was nowhere else to go, and I listened to him breathe, this man I had built my entire adult life around, and I felt like I was lying next to a stranger wearing my husband's skin. He fell asleep. He fell asleep. He just told his wife he'd impregnated another woman and asked her to help raise the baby, and he slept like a man with a clear conscience. I lay there with my eyes open until the gray light came through the curtains, and somewhere in those long hours I made my decision and didn't waver from it once. The next morning, while he was in the shower, I rang my sister. I'll call her Claire. I didn't tell her everything. I couldn't, not over the phone, not with my voice doing the thing it was doing. I just said, Daniel and I are finished. I need somewhere to stay. Can I come? And Claire, bless her, didn't ask a single question. She just said, the guest room's yours for as long as you need it. Come whenever you want. I'll have the kettle on. And I sat down on the cold bathroom floor outside the shower door and I cried, silently, into my own sleeve because someone in the world still loved me without conditions. I started packing that day. Not everything. I couldn't carry my whole life in one go. But the important things. My clothes. My books. The photo of my own late grandmother. Eleanor's freesia-scented hand cream that I'd kept after the funeral, which I took without a second thought, because she would have wanted me to have it, and because Daniel didn't deserve to keep a single thing that smelled like the mother I'd cared for and he'd betrayed. I packed quietly, methodically, while he was at work. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want a scene. I just wanted out. There was a practical problem, though, and it's one I want to be honest about, because it's the kind of thing nobody warns you about. The flat. Both our names were on that lease, signed side by side in what I'd once thought was romance. Which meant, legally, he had every bit as much right to be there as I did. I couldn't change the locks. I couldn't throw him out. I couldn't force the man who'd blown up our marriage to be the one to leave. I had to go. The wrong party. The one who'd done nothing but love and care and stay faithful. I had to be the one packing boxes while he kept the home we'd built. People asked me later, again and again, why didn't you make him leave? Why didn't you change the locks and send him off to live with her? And I understand the instinct, I do, but that's not how it works. The landlord wouldn't permit it. Both names on the lease meant she couldn't legally favor one of us, and she certainly wasn't going to get involved in a marital war zone. The law doesn't care who broke the marriage. It only cares whose name is on the paper. So I did the only thing I could. I rang the landlord myself and told her I was leaving, that I would not be signing a renewal when the lease ended in February. And here's where my sister became more than just a guest room. The lease had 2 months left to run, and I was terrified Daniel would somehow weasel out of it and leave me on the hook, dragging me into months of fighting over rent on a flat I'd never set foot in again. Claire wouldn't have it. She lent me the money to pay the final 2 months directly to the landlord herself, so that it was done, settled, severed clean. The landlord knew exactly when I was leaving and exactly that I wasn't coming back. I took photographs of the entire flat before I walked out. Every wall, every fixture, the condition of every room. Because the one piece of advice I clung to in those early days was protect yourself, document everything, assume nothing. I wanted my share of the deposit back, and I wasn't going to give him a single crack to wedge open. I left the day after he asked me to raise as a fair child. Just 24 hours. I didn't draw it out. I loaded what I could into Claire's car, and I stood in the doorway of the flat one last time, looking at the radiator that clanked and the window that stuck and the little box room where Eleanor had spent her final months, and I felt the strangest mix of grief and relief, like I was leaving a house that had already burned down and only I could see the smoke. I didn't tell anyone the full story at first. Not my friends, not Daniel's family, not even Claire, not all of it. I needed the truth to be mine for a little while before it became everyone's. I think I was protecting myself, holding the details close like a wound you don't want anyone to touch. I knew that once I said it out loud, fully, to everyone, it would become real in a way I wasn't ready for. So I held it. Through Christmas, I held it. That was the loneliest Christmas of my life. Claire and her husband were kind. They included me in everything. They put an extra stocking up on the mantle with my name on it in glitter pen like I was a kid again, and I love them for it. But I spent most of that holiday in a fog. I catch myself in the middle of a conversation, suddenly remembering, oh, right, my husband cheated on me for the entire time I was burying his mother, and he wanted me to babysit the result, and I'd have to excuse myself and go stand in the cold garden until I could breathe again. After Christmas, I did the thing I'd promised myself I'd do. I went to see a divorce solicitor. I sat in a quiet office with a box of tissues already placed on the desk like she knew, and I told her everything in a flat, careful voice, and she nodded and took notes, and at the end she said something that I've held onto ever since. She said, "You're being remarkably clear-headed. That's going to serve you well. Most people in your position are tangled up in trying to understand why. You skip straight to what now? That's strength." I didn't feel strong. I felt hollowed out. But I let myself borrow her version of me for a while, the clear-headed woman who knew what she wanted. I hired her on the spot. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button. We post news stories every day. Because the truth is what I thought was the worst of it, that December confession, wasn't even close. The lies were just beginning to come apart. And over the next 3.5 months, I learned that almost nothing Daniel had told me that night had been true. The first lie unraveled when I started actually thinking about the woman, the colleague. He'd told me she was married, that she couldn't leave her husband, that this whole impossible arrangement was the only way because she was trapped in a marriage of her own. It had been the cornerstone of his entire ridiculous proposal. She can't raise it. She's married. So you have to help me. But something about it nagged at me. So I did a little digging, the way you do when you've stopped trusting a single word from someone's mouth. And it turned out she wasn't married at all. She was engaged. There was no husband. There was a fiancé, a man named, I'll call him Tom, who, as far as I could tell, had absolutely no idea what was going on. Daniel had told me her husband knew about the affair, that her marriage was some open, complicated thing where everyone was aware. Another lie. Tom didn't know. He had no clue that his fiancée was 8 months pregnant with another man's child while planning a wedding with him. And I sat with that knowledge for a long time, because telling him meant detonating his life the way mine had been detonated. But I kept coming back to one thought. If it were me, if I were the one walking around oblivious, planning a future with someone who was secretly carrying another man's baby, I would want to know. I would need to know. Nobody deserves to build a life on a foundation that's already rotted through. So I told him. I found a way to reach Tom, and I told him the truth gently as I could, with proof so he wouldn't think I was some unhinged stranger. I don't know exactly what happened to that engagement afterward. I heard it didn't survive, which doesn't surprise me, though I take no pleasure in it. I just know that I couldn't carry that secret for Daniel's convenience. He'd lied to keep everyone in the dark. I wasn't going to be complicit in keeping the lights off for someone who'd done nothing wrong. The second lie was about the pregnancy itself. Back in December, Daniel had told me she wasn't even halfway through, like there was still time, like the baby was some distant, abstract thing on a far horizon. I think he wanted to soften it, to make it feel less real, less immediate. But she wasn't halfway through anything. She was over 8 months pregnant. 8 months. Which meant that when he sat me down in December and confessed, that baby was practically due. He'd been letting me care for his dying mother, letting me grieve her, letting me plan her funeral, all while a child of his was weeks away from being born to a woman he worked beside every day. The timeline of it made me physically ill once I worked it out. The math of his betrayal was so much worse than the betrayal he'd confessed to. And the third lie, the one that, oddly, hurt the most, was about how long it had been going on. He told me the affair was less than 6 months old, as if it were some recent slip, a moment of weakness during a hard time, the kind of thing a marriage might, theoretically, with enough work, recover from. I think he told me that on purpose, to leave the door cracked open, to make me think maybe we could fix this. But it wasn't 6 months. It had been going on for almost 2 years. 2 years. Which meant it started while Eleanor was still alive, still living in our flat, still being bathed and fed and comforted by me in the small hours. He'd been carrying on with this woman for the better part of the time I'd spent emptying myself out caring for his mother. I keep coming back to that overlap because it reframes everything. Every late night, I thought he was working to support us. Every time he stepped out for air, including, I now suspect, the morning his own mother died. Every distance I'd felt and excused and forgiven. It wasn't grief or exhaustion. It was guilt, or worse, it wasn't even guilt. It was just a man living a double life and finding me a useful, convenient backdrop to it. The free caretaker. The faithful wife who'd never think to check the floor she was standing on. And then there was the final small humiliation, the cherry on top of it all. Daniel had told me that their manager and their colleagues only found out about the affair after I did. As if I'd been the first to know, as if there'd been some discretion, some shred of respect for me in the order of revelations. But no, everyone at his work had known before me. His colleagues, his manager, they'd all known he was carrying on with this woman, watched her belly grow, exchanged knowing glances, while I was at home with no idea, washing his mother's bed sheets. I was the last to know about my own life. The wife is always the last to know, they say, and now I understand the particular flavor of that humiliation, the way it makes you question every interaction you've ever had, wondering who knew, who pitied you, who said nothing. His family, at least, was on my side. When the full truth came out, and it did come out, every ugly piece of it, his siblings and his wider family were horrified. Genuinely, deeply horrified. They couldn't believe what he'd done. And more than that, they couldn't believe what he'd done while I was caring for their mother. Eleanor, before the dementia took her, had been a woman of fierce principles, the kind of woman who would have marched her son out by the ear for treating his wife this way. They all knew it. One of his sisters rang me, crying, and said, "Mum loved you like a daughter. She would be ashamed of him. We're ashamed of him." And I held on to that. Because in the wreckage of everything, the one thing I needed to know was that I hadn't been a fool to love that family, that the warmth I'd felt from Eleanor had been real, even if her son's love for me had been a convenient lie. I want to be clear about something, because people sometimes look at me with this pitying expression when I tell them I cared for his mother for a year and a half while he cheated, like I'd been duped, like the caregiving was wasted. It wasn't. I do not regret a single moment I spent caring for Eleanor. Not one. She was worth every sleepless night, every difficult morning, every ounce of patience I poured into her. My caring for her was never about him. It was about her, and about the kind of person I want to be. He doesn't get to taint that. He doesn't get to make my love for that woman into something foolish. It was the realest, purest thing in those years, and it remains mine. Through all of it, the unraveling, the lies coming apart one by one, Daniel didn't stop. That's the thing people find hardest to believe. He didn't slink away in shame once he was caught in his web of falsehoods. No, he doubled down. He called me. He texted me. He turned up places hoping to catch me. He told me, over and over, that he regretted the affair, that he loved me more than anything in the world, that I was the only woman he'd ever truly wanted. And every time, he came back around to the same impossible ask. Stay with me. Help me raise the baby. We'll share custody. We'll still have time for ourselves. He never seemed to understand that the more he begged, the more he proved exactly why I had to leave. A man who loved me more than anything had carried on a 2-year affair while I nursed his dying mother. A man who wanted me more than any woman in the world had gotten another woman pregnant and then asked me to mother the child. His version of love was a thing that cost him nothing and demanded everything from me. It was a love that wanted a free caretaker for his mother and a free babysitter for his mistress's baby, dressed up in the language of devotion. And I was done. I was so completely, finally done. I think the moment I knew I'd never go back, not that I'd ever truly considered it, but the moment the door closed in my own heart, was when I really sat with that phrase he kept using. We'll still have time for ourselves. We. Who was the we in that sentence? He'd built an entire fantasy in his head where I would simply absorb his betrayal, fold it into our lives like an extra chore, take on his affair child on the weekends she wasn't with her mother, and in exchange I'd get to keep him. As if keeping him were the prize. As if I should be grateful. The sheer audacity of it, the breathtaking selfishness, told me everything I'd ever need to know about who he really was underneath the cheesy notes and the lemon drizzle and the 8 years of marriage. He didn't see me as a wife. He saw me as infrastructure. So I let my solicitor do her work. I didn't engage with his pleading. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I didn't give him the satisfaction of fight he could spin into we're working through things. I just kept moving forward, one careful step at a time, the way I had since that first cold morning. The divorce is going through. I'm in Claire's guest room still, though I've started looking at little places of my own, places with my name and only my name on the lease. I think about that a lot. The idea of a door that only I have the key to. It sounds like such a small thing. To me, it sounds like freedom. Drop a comment below. Do you think she made the right call, walking away from a marriage of 8 years rather than accepting his arrangement? I know what I believe, but I've learned that people surprise you, and I genuinely like to know how it sits with you, hearing it all laid out like this. The baby has been born by now, I imagine. I don't know the details, and I don't want to. That child is innocent in all of this, and I hope, sincerely, that it's loved and cared for, because no baby asked to be born into a mess made by selfish adults. But it's not mine to love. It was never mine to love. Daniel tried to hand me a responsibility that belonged to him and the choices he made in the dark, and the kindest thing I can do for that child, and for myself, is to refuse it cleanly and let them all sort out the life they built without me in it. People ask if I'm angry. I was at first a deep, cold anger that frightened me a little with how steady it was. But anger like that can't sustain you. What I feel now, mostly, is a strange and growing lightness. For a year and a half, I carried the weight of a dying woman with grace and exhaustion, and I did it gladly. For 8 years, I carried a marriage I believed was equal, only to learn I'd been carrying it alone. And now, for the first time and longer than I can remember, I'm not carrying anyone but myself. It's quiet. It's lonely some nights, but it's honest, and after living inside someone else's lies for 2 years without knowing it, I will take honest loneliness over comfortable deceit every single time. I think about Eleanor a lot. I still have her Frisia hand cream, and sometimes I open the cap just to smell it, and it brings her back for a moment, the warm laugh, the way she called me love. I like to think that wherever she is, she knows I stayed by her side until the end, and that I had nothing to do with the wreckage her son made of his life. I like to think she'd have hugged me and told me to go, to build something real, to not waste another day mothering a man who never grew up. I think she'd have been proud of how clear-headed I managed to be. And on the hard nights, I borrow that version of her too, the way I borrowed my solicitor's steadiness, and I let her tell me I did the right thing. Here's what I've taken from all of it, the thing I want to leave you with. When someone shows you, plainly and without shame, exactly who they are, when a man can look you in the eye and ask you to raise the proof of his betrayal and feel hopeful about it, believe them. Believe them the first time. Don't reach for the version of them you wish were true. The cruelest lies aren't always the ones told in the dark. Sometimes the cruelest one is the story we tell ourselves to keep standing on a floor that's already given way. I loved a man who saw me as something to be used, and the bravest thing I ever did was stop loving him the moment he showed me the truth, pack a single car full of what mattered, and walk out the door of a flat with both our names on the lease, into a life that would finally only ever have mine. Guys, we are inching toward 1,000 subscribers on this channel. If you're not subscribed, please consider hitting subscribe. It really helps us hit that 1,000 milestone. Thanks for sticking around.